right after the Trump administration left office, the Chinese Communist Party leveled sanctions against several different officials. Let's put this up there on the screen, including Peter Navarro, Mike Pompeo, and many others. And as friend of the show, Matt Stoller, astutely pointed out, the Chinese government is sending a message to the Biden administration saying, hey, if you pursue a policy which is against our interests, you are going to have a lot of trouble earning money from most American corporations after you leave the administration because you are now sanctioned from business with China.
Joining us now to discuss is great friend of the show and independent journalist, Zaid Jilani. Great to see you, Zaid.
Good to see you, Zaid.
Yeah, great to be here.
Just help us understand the significance of this move from the Chinese government.
Yeah, it's really interesting because they waited until basically the moment when Joe Biden took office to levy these sanctions, right? This group of Trump advisors are now becoming private citizens. They no longer work for the U.S. government. So there isn't really any priority to have them travel to China on U.S. government business. But as many people exit government, they often go into the private sector. This was certainly the case under the last administration, Obama's administration. Is probably will be the case under the Trump administration. One of the hottest sort of markets for people with access and advice to getting contracts with the government, getting access to government information, of course, is China. Even some of Biden's picks for his White House and for his administration, like Anthony Blinken, had worked for consulting firms where it paid very well if you knew how to access foreign markets, if you knew how to navigate kind of the government and the legal infrastructure of those countries. Basically, what China is doing is saying that if you are someone who's more antagonistic towards the status quo of the U.S.-China relationship, of which somebody like a Peter Navarro probably was more antagonistic than anyone who had ever served at a senior level in government, people like Mike Pompeo are on the more antagonistic side, that we're essentially going to place sanctions on you so you can't travel to China, and that you really couldn't provide any service to any kind of private firm or any kind of consulting or lobbying interest that may want access to China, which was basically cutting off your legs for making a lot of future money. Now, it's also very interesting, and I think the guy who Stoller was referring to, who writes for Substack, is a China expert. He noted that people like Jared Kushner were not on that list, right? Like people in the Trump administration who were not on board being more critical towards the China relationship were not subject to sanctions. So that is sending a very clear message that if you are in the Biden administration, you know, you're thinking about your next job. If you develop a reputation of someone who's quote unquote anti-China, or someone who wants to talk about reshoring, wants to talk about human rights towards China's Muslim minority or towards people in Hong Kong or Tibet, you may be on a future hit list for sanctions, and your future you may get a future pay cut already.
Yeah, it's not a joke. And I want people to understand that. Like, you know how many businesses in Fortune 500s in America do business with China? And look, U.S. sanctions are the same way, which is that if somebody's doing business with somebody who is sanctioned by the U.S., then they can get cut off by the global financial system. China doesn't have that level of clout, but it has some, here in our own country. And that's the message that they're sending. At the same time, Zed, I was heartened by this. Look, I mean, I don't like Tony Blinken. I think he's made a lot of mistakes. He definitely hawked, companies the ability to enter market access with China as recently as like 6 months ago. But he was asked at his confirmation hearing how he thought of the Trump-China policy. He said he agreed with the characterization the Chinese government is committing genocide against Uyghurs, and actually commended President Trump for his stance against China. So it's not like all hope is lost, but the costs for sticking your neck out, as you said, like Secretary of State, it's going to be high for somebody like Tony. He can't go back to the same consulting firm he did. Not that I really care, but it is a problem.
Yeah, and I think that this is sort of China recognizing that they are in a different political environment now. So even during the campaign, even when he was on the campaign trail, Joe Biden classified as what was happening with Uyghurs as genocide, right? I think he was the first person to do that. And then the Trump administration went on in its final days to use that term as well. So China understands that the political environment is changing, that Democrats and Republicans who used to be much more friendly with China are starting to distance from China, particularly after COVID-19, but also the human rights crackdowns, larger substantial structural trading issues, things like that. And I think, though, that China understands, China can also see the long view here, though, right? Which is that, for instance, the George H.W. Bush administration publicly was very critical of China after Tiananmen Square massacre. They did a bunch of kind of show press conferences, they levied some responses, but behind the scenes, they were already rebuilding the relationship. This didn't come out until some amount of time later. So China thinks that I think if I was the Chinese government, I would think I could do the same thing. A year or two down the road, COVID-19 won't be such a big deal. People will have accepted the new status quo in Hong Kong, so on and so forth. We can start bending these people back towards our will just because we have so much clout, particularly through the private sector, right? I mean, as you mentioned, Fortune 500, one of the developments over the past year was that Muslim American activists who work for CARE petitioned the NBA to withdraw business from China. NBA didn't even feel compelled to respond to that, right? They haven't even issued an official response to CARE and what they asked them to do. I think that China understands that it has leveraged so much American business within its borders that American politicians may feel more free to be critical of China given the events of the past year or two, but they still feel like they have leverage over our system. And I think that they're thinking about the longer view than the political climate right now, because of course right now we do live in a climate where no politician is going to get up on the Senate floor and start defending China. It's changed so much over the past few years. But over the longer span of time, does China have the levers to put things back in its favor and to prevent substantial policy change? And I think that's the big question.
Huge question.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is they really understand that in America, if you want to understand how things happen and get things done, just follow the money. Zed, always great to have your perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
And we'll have more Rising for you after this.